The alien vessel shimmered like liquid silver against the void of space, its elongated form bristling with spindly appendages that pulsed with bioluminescent energy. Inside the command nexus, the overseer, a towering figure of coiled tendrils and multifaceted eyes, gazed at the holographic representation of Earth. It was a blue-green gem, almost serene, spinning quietly in the vast emptiness. Primitive, the overseer rasped, its voice a discordant blend of clicking and hissing, yet teeming with biomass. Ideal for harvest. Around it, the other Krexian elites nodded their bulbous heads in agreement. For eons, the Krexians had scoured the galaxy, consuming lesser species and stripping worlds bare. Humans, they assumed, would be no different, soft, squishy, and utterly defenseless. Deploy the scouts, the overseer commanded. The scout ships, a fleet of sleek, organic-looking crafts, descended into Earth's atmosphere with predatory grace. Each one housed a crew of 6 Krexian hunters, eager for the feast ahead. Their target, a bustling cityscape they had identified as a hub of human activity. As the first craft touched down in an abandoned factory yard, its hatch hissed open, and the hunters emerged. Their sleek, chitinous bodies glistened in the moonlight, claws twitching with anticipation. They spread out, moving with practiced precision through the shadows. Unbeknownst to them, the humans were already watching. In a dimly lit command center deep beneath the city, Major Elena Grant studied the grainy footage on her monitor. Her sharp eyes tracked the movements of the Krexians with the cold calculation of a predator sizing up its prey. Around her, a team of hardened operatives worked in hushed urgency, their movements efficient and deliberate. "How many?" Grant asked, her voice low but commanding. 10 ships. Estimated 60 hostiles, replied a young analyst. All armed with plasma weaponry. Grant nodded, her jaw tightening. "Alert the teams. We move now." Within minutes, squads of operatives clad in advanced tactical gear converged on the Krexians' landing site. These weren't ordinary soldiers, they were members of a top-secret unit trained specifically for extraterrestrial encounters. They called themselves the Predators, a name earned through years of brutal, clandestine warfare against alien incursions. The first encounter was swift and brutal. The Krexians, moving through a maze of alleyways, suddenly found themselves surrounded. The humans emerged from the darkness like wraiths, their black armor blending seamlessly with the shadows. There was no warning, no negotiation, just a sudden, coordinated assault. A hail of silent projectiles, specially designed to pierce Krexian exoskeletons, ripped through the air. The aliens screeched in surprise and pain, their bioluminescent bodies flaring in distress. One by one, they fell, their acidic blood sizzling as it hit the ground. But the Krexians weren't entirely unprepared. The remaining hunters regrouped, raising their plasma rifles and firing indiscriminately. Blinding bursts of green energy lit up the night, scorching concrete and steel alike. Grant's team responded with calculated ferocity. They moved like a single, deadly organism, their augmented reflexes and Neuralink systems giving them a decisive edge. A soldier vaulted over a barricade, landing behind a Krexian and driving a blade into its central nerve cluster. Another fired a grenade launcher, the explosion shredding the aliens' ranks. By the time the dust settled, only 2 Krexians remained. One was severely wounded, its limbs twitching as it dragged itself toward cover. The other stood frozen, its multifaceted eyes locked on the humans who now surrounded it. Grant stepped forward, her weapon lowered but ready. "You thought we were prey," she said, her voice calm and deadly. "Big mistake." High above the battlefield, aboard the Krexian mothership, the Overseer watched in disbelief. The holographic feed showed its hunters being annihilated by creatures it had dismissed as inferior. "Impossible," it hissed, its tendrils quivering. "They are evolved predators." One of its advisors clicked nervously. "We underestimated them. Their weapons, their tactics, they are far more advanced than anticipated." The Overseer's eyes narrowed. "Prepare the second wave. Deploy the shock troopers. And this time, no mercy." Back on Earth, Grant and her team regrouped, their victory tempered by the knowledge that this was only the beginning. As they prepared for the next encounter, a low rumble filled the air, a sound that seemed to vibrate through their very bones. They looked up to see the night sky come alive with fiery streaks. The Craxians were sending reinforcements. Grant smirked, her adrenaline surging. Looks like round two's starting early. Let's show them what real predators can do. The streaks of fire descending from the sky weren't just reinforcements, they were Craxian shock troopers, elite warriors bred specifically for ground combat. Their pods smashed into the earth with bone-jarring force, sending shockwaves through the cityscape. From each pod emerged a towering Craxian clad in dark, iridescent armor that shimmered ominously under the moonlight. They carried massive plasma cannons and razor-edged energy blades, their glowing eyes scanning the ruins for signs of resistance. Major Grant and her team had retreated to a secondary position, a fortified underground complex beneath the city streets. They watched the descent on their monitors, noting the efficiency and precision of the alien deployment. "These aren't the grunts we faced before," one of her operatives muttered. "No," Grant said, her voice edged with steel. "They've brought their best. But so have we." The team's arsenal was more advanced than even the Craxians could have anticipated. EMP grenades, plasma disruptor rounds, and neural scramblers, tools designed for one purpose: leveling the playing field against technologically superior foes. Grant's team wasn't just trained to fight aliens, they were trained to outthink them. "Activate the decoys," Grant ordered. Above ground, holographic projections of human troops flickered to life, running through the streets in chaotic, uncoordinated patterns. The shock troopers, mistaking the illusions for real targets, opened fire. Plasma bursts lit up the night, tearing through walls and vehicles but leaving the decoys unharmed. "Idiots," one operative snorted as they watched the chaos unfold on their monitors. But the Craxians weren't entirely fooled. One of the troopers, more observant than the others, halted its advance. Its glowing eyes narrowed as it scanned the area. It growled a guttural command in its native tongue, and the troopers adjusted their strategy, spreading out and advancing cautiously. "Looks like they're catching on," Grant said. She grabbed her comms. "Team Alpha, engage." A squad of 6 operatives emerged from the shadows, moving with the silent precision of predators stalking their prey. Each wore a lightweight exosuit that enhanced their speed and strength, making them more than a match for the Craxians in close combat. The first strike was devastating. An EMP grenade sailed through the air, detonating in a burst of electric blue light. Several shock troopers collapsed as their armor and weapons were temporarily disabled. Before they could recover, the operatives were on them, blades flashing and rifles spitting fire. One trooper roared in defiance, swinging its energy blade in a wide arc. An operative narrowly dodged the strike, rolling beneath the alien's legs and planting a charge on its back. The explosion sent the trooper crashing to the ground, its armor smoking. Meanwhile, Grant led a second team through the city's underground tunnels, aiming to flank the Craxians from behind. The tunnels were dark and claustrophobic, the air thick with the scent of damp concrete and oil. But Grant's team moved with purpose, their path illuminated by the soft glow of their helmet lights. "Contact in 10, one operative whispered, his voice barely audible over the comms. Grant nodded, signaling her team to spread out. They emerged from a hidden access point into the heart of the Craxian formation. The aliens were focused on the decoys and the operatives above ground, leaving their rear exposed. "Light 'em up," Grant said. Her team unleashed hell. Rockets streaked through the air, detonating in fiery bursts that scattered the Craxians like bowling pins. Plasma disruptor rounds pierced armor and flesh alike, leaving the shock troopers reeling. But the Craxians were quick to adapt. Their leader, a massive trooper with a jagged crest on its head, roared a command. The surviving aliens regrouped, forming a defensive perimeter. Their plasma cannons hummed ominously as they powered up for a counterattack. "Fall back!" Grant shouted. Her team retreated into the tunnels just as the Craxians opened fire. The blasts tore through the ground above, sending debris raining down. One operative stumbled, caught by a collapsing beam. "Leave me," he gasped, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. "Not a chance," Grant snapped, hauling him to his feet. They stumbled down the tunnel as the Craxians pursued, their guttural roars echoing through the darkness. Meanwhile, Back at the command center, the analysts were scrambling to process the new data. The Krexians had deployed a device, a strange, pulsating orb, that appeared to emit some kind of signal. "It's a beacon," one analyst said, her voice tight with alarm. "They are calling for reinforcements." "How much time do we have?" the commander asked. "Minutes. Maybe less." The room fell silent. The Krexians had underestimated humanity, but now the humans faced an even greater threat. If reinforcements arrived, the battle would become a full-scale invasion. "Grant," the commander said over the comms, his voice grim. "We need that beacon destroyed. Now." "Understood," Grant replied. She glanced at her team, their faces streaked with sweat and grime but resolute. "You heard him. Let's end this." They emerged from the tunnels into an open courtyard where the beacon stood, its pulsating light casting eerie shadows. The remaining shock troopers encircled it, their weapons raised. Grant's team didn't hesitate. They charged forward, a whirlwind of fire and fury. Explosions rocked the courtyard as grenades found their marks. Operatives engaged the Krexians in brutal hand-to-hand combat, their exosuits giving them the edge they needed to hold their own against the alien giants. Grant herself faced off against the leader. It swung its energy blade in a deadly arc, but she ducked under the blow and drove her combat knife into the joint of its armor. The alien bellowed in pain, lashing out with its claws. Grant sidestepped the attack, firing her sidearm point-blank into its face. The alien fell with a final, guttural snarl. "Beacons exposed," one of her operatives shouted. Grant sprinted toward the device, planting charges around its base. She set the timer for 10 seconds and turned to her team. "Move." They barely made it to cover before the charges detonated. The beacon erupted in a blinding explosion, sending a shockwave that flattened everything in its radius. As the dust settled, Grant surveyed the battlefield. The shock troopers were either dead or incapacitated, and the beacon was nothing more than a smoking crater. "Mission accomplished," she said, her voice steady despite the exhaustion creeping into her limbs. But deep in the night sky, the Krexian mothership loomed, its silhouette ominous against the stars. The battle was far from over. High above Earth's atmosphere, the Krexian mothership hummed with sinister energy. Inside its massive central chamber, the Overseer stood motionless, its multifaceted eyes fixed on the tactical display. The loss of the shock troopers and the beacon was an embarrassment, but the humans' unexpected ferocity had triggered something far more dangerous: curiosity. "They fight like cornered predators," the Overseer rasped, its voice echoing through the chamber. "Adaptable, relentless. Perhaps we have underestimated not just their strength but their cunning." Another advisor, a smaller Krexian with a serpentine form, approached cautiously. "Should we retreat, Overseer? We have the data we need. Their capabilities." "Silence," the Overseer barked, its tendrils quivering with anger. "Retreat is not an option. This species must be crushed, or others will see our failure and rise against us." With a wave of its spindly hand, the Overseer activated the ship's doomsday protocol. Massive hangar doors opened, revealing rows upon rows of drones, mechanized horrors designed for planetary annihilation. Unlike the biological shock troopers, these machines felt no fear, no pain. They existed solely to exterminate. "Deploy the Reapers," the Overseer commanded. "Let the humans face true despair." Below, Major Grant and her team had barely begun regrouping when the sky darkened. A swarm of metallic shapes descended like a plague of locusts, their razor-sharp appendages glinting in the moonlight. Each drone was armed with a suite of weapons: high-energy plasma cannons, buzzsaw-like blades, and missile pods. Grant's team watched the swarm in stunned silence. The drones moved with eerie synchronicity, their glowing red eyes scanning the ruins with cold precision. "Contact in 20 seconds, one operative reported, his voice strained. "Fall back to the command center," Grant ordered, her tone unwavering despite the knot of dread tightening in her chest. "We can't fight them out in the open." The team retreated through the wreckage, their boots pounding against cracked asphalt. Behind them, the first wave of drones opened fire. Plasma blasts rained down, tearing through buildings and vehicles with ruthless efficiency. One operative stumbled, a shard of molten debris slicing into his leg. "Leave me," he shouted, clutching his rifle. "Not happening," another operative growled, slinging the injured man over his shoulder. They reached the entrance to the command center just as the drones began their final approach. Automated turrets mounted along the perimeter sprang to life, spitting streams of gunfire and energy bursts. The drones faltered momentarily, but their numbers were overwhelming. "Close the blast doors," Grant shouted. The massive steel barriers slid shut with a grinding roar, sealing the humans inside. But the drones didn't stop. They began cutting through the doors with plasma torches, their glowing edges carving deep, molten scars into the metal. In the command center's war room, the atmosphere was tense. Analysts worked frantically to find a weakness in the drone's design, while engineers rerouted power to the turrets and shields. "We're holding them off, but not for long," one analyst said, his face pale. Grant stood at the center of the chaos, her mind racing. She knew they couldn't outlast the swarm. Their only hope was to strike at the source, the Crexian mothership. "Commander," she said, turning to the ranking officer, "we need to take the fight to them." "Are you out of your mind?" he snapped. "That ship is a fortress." "Exactly," Grant replied. "It's the only thing keeping this invasion alive. We destroy it, the drones shut down, and we buy Earth a fighting chance." The commander hesitated, then nodded grimly. "All right. But you'll need a way up there." "We've got one," Grant said, pulling up a schematic on the holographic display. "The Crexians' own dropships. We captured one intact during their last attack. If we can reprogram its navigation system, I'll get the tech team on it," the commander said. Minutes later, Grant and a small strike team boarded the captured dropship. The interior was cramped and alien, the walls pulsing with faint, organic light. Engineers had jury-rigged the controls, replacing Crexian glyphs with human interfaces. "Navigation is locked onto the mothership," one engineer reported. "You'll have a short window to land before their defenses light you up." "That's all we need," Grant said, securing her helmet. The dropship shuddered as it took off, its alien engines humming with an unsettling, otherworldly frequency. As they ascended through the atmosphere, the carnage below shrank into a patchwork of glowing fires and darkened ruins. Inside the mothership, the overseer watched the approaching vessel with narrowed eyes. "What is this?" it muttered. "A captured scout ship? Foolish." But as the dropship neared, it suddenly veered off course, diving into a blind spot in the mothership's defenses. The humans had anticipated the overseer's reaction and planned accordingly. The strike team landed in a maintenance bay, their arrival unnoticed amidst the chaos of the ongoing deployment. They moved swiftly, planting charges on critical systems and hacking into the ship's central network. "The overseer's chamber is 3 levels up," one operative whispered. "Then that's where we're going," Grant said. The team ascended through the alien labyrinth, encountering minimal resistance, at first. But as they approached the command center, alarms blared, and Crexian soldiers poured into the corridors. "Hold the line," Grant shouted as they took cover. The ensuing firefight was brutal. Plasma bolts scorched the walls, and the air was thick with smoke and the acrid stench of burning flesh. Grant's team fought with desperate determination, using every trick and weapon at their disposal. One by one, the Crexians fell. When the last soldier hit the ground, Grant pushed forward, her heart pounding. They burst into the overseer's chamber, where the alien leader stood surrounded by holographic displays. "You dare to defile my vessel," it hissed, its tendrils flaring. "Consider it a warning," Grant said, raising her weapon. The overseer lunged, its tendrils lashing out like whips. Grant dodged, firing her rifle in controlled bursts. The rest of the team joined the fight, their weapons chipping away at the overseer's armor-like exoskeleton. Finally, with a deafening roar, the overseer collapsed. Grant planted the final charge on the ship's core, setting a timer for 2 minutes. "Let's move," she yelled. They raced back to the dropship, narrowly escaping as the mothership erupted in a massive explosion. The blast sent shockwaves rippling through space, and the drones on Earth fell lifeless, their connection severed. As the dropship descended toward the ruined city, Grant allowed herself a small, grim smile. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. The dropship landed amidst the smoldering ruins of the city, its thrusters kicking up clouds of ash and debris. Major Grant and her surviving team emerged, battered but alive, their faces grim. Around them, the battlefield was eerily silent. The Krexian drones lay inert, their glowing eyes extinguished. Fires crackled in the distance, casting flickering shadows over the wreckage. But there was no time for celebration. Grant's earpiece crackled to life, and the commander's voice came through, heavy with urgency. "Grant, report." "The mothership's gone," she replied. "Drones are down. Casualties are high, but we're still standing." "Not for long," the commander said. "We just intercepted a transmission. The overseer managed to send a distress signal before you took out the core. Reinforcements are en route, bigger, faster, meaner." Grant's stomach clenched. "Hours, maybe less," the commander said. "And this time, it's not just a fleet. It's an armada." Back in the subterranean command center, a somber energy hung over the room. Analysts worked tirelessly, their fingers flying over keyboards as they calculated trajectories and ran simulations. The holographic display of Earth was surrounded by red markers, each one representing an incoming Krexian warship. Grant stood at the center of it all, her mind racing. They had barely survived the first wave, and now they were facing a full-scale invasion. "What's our plan?" she asked, her voice cutting through the tension. The commander sighed. "We don't have the firepower to take on an armada. Evacuation is our best option. Get as many civilians off-world as we can and regroup at the lunar base." Grant shook her head. "That's not a plan. That's surrender. It's survival," the commander snapped. "We've done everything we can here." "No," Grant said firmly. "We haven't." She turned to the holographic display, her eyes narrowing. "If we can't beat them with brute force, we beat them with strategy. We've already proven we can outthink them. Now we do it on a larger scale." "What are you suggesting?" the commander asked, his tone skeptical. "A trap," Grant said, her mind already piecing together the plan. "We lure the armada into the upper atmosphere and detonate the fusion cores from our orbital satellites. The blast won't destroy all of them, but it'll cripple their formation and buy us time to regroup." The room fell silent. "That's a hell of a gamble," the commander said finally. "It's our only shot," Grant replied. The preparations began immediately. Teams worked around the clock, rigging the satellites with explosive charges and recalibrating their targeting systems. Civilians were evacuated to underground shelters, and the remaining military forces consolidated their resources for one final stand. As the Krexian armada drew closer, their ships filled the skies like a storm of fire and steel. Massive carriers, flanked by squadrons of fighters, descended through the atmosphere, their sheer size casting shadows over entire cities. Grant stood atop a rooftop, her gaze fixed on the approaching fleet. She felt the weight of the moment, the lives depending on her decision. "All units, this is Major Grant," she said into her comms. "Today, we remind the Krexians why humans aren't prey. We're predators. And predators fight to the end." The battle began with a deafening roar. Human forces launched everything they had: missiles, railguns, even experimental energy weapons. The sky was a chaotic blur of fire and smoke as the Krexians retaliated, their plasma cannons raining destruction on the earth below. Grant coordinated the defense with precision, her commands cutting through the chaos. Squads of operatives engaged Krexian ground forces in brutal street-to-street combat, while anti-air batteries targeted the alien fighters swarming above. But it was clear the humans were outmatched. For every Krexian ship they destroyed, 2 more seemed to take its place. "Satellites are in position," an engineer reported. "Charges armed and ready." "Hold steady," Grant replied, her voice steady despite the mounting pressure. "We need to draw them in closer." The Krexian carriers began descending, their massive hulls glowing with energy as they prepared to unleash their planet-cracking weapons. "Now!" Grant shouted. In orbit, the satellites detonated. The fusion cores erupted in blinding bursts of light, the shockwaves rippling through space and atmosphere alike. Several Krexian ships were obliterated instantly, their fragments raining down like fiery meteors. Others were thrown off course, crashing into one another in the chaos. On the ground, the humans erupted in cheers, their despair momentarily replaced by hope. But the battle wasn't over. The surviving Krexian ships regrouped, their commanders adjusting their tactics. One of the carriers, larger and more heavily armed than the rest, descended toward the city where Grant and her team were stationed. "They are coming for us," one operative said, his voice tight with fear. "Good," Grant replied, a fierce determination burning in her eyes. "Let's finish this." As the carrier loomed overhead, its weapons charging, Grant led her team in a desperate assault. They climbed aboard the ship using grappling hooks and jetpacks, fighting their way through its corridors with ruthless efficiency. Finally, they reached the ship's control center. Grant planted the last of their charges on the core, setting the timer for 30 seconds. "Get to the extraction point," she ordered. "What about you?" an operative asked. "I'll be right behind you," she said, but they all knew it was a lie. As the team escaped, Grant remained behind, facing the Krexian captain, a hulking figure clad in intricate armor. The alien snarled, its claws glinting in the dim light. "You've lost," Grant said, raising her weapon. "No," the captain growled. "You have." They clashed in a brutal fight, trading blows that left both blooded and battered. Finally, with a roar of defiance, Grant plunged her combat knife into the captain's throat. She stumbled toward the extraction point as the timer ticked down, her vision swimming. Just as the charges detonated, she leaped from the ship, her parachute deploying as the carrier exploded in a brilliant blaze of light. The Krexian armada, leaderless and crippled, began retreating. On the ground, humanity's remaining forces watched in awe as the invaders fled, their monstrous ships disappearing into the void. Grant landed amidst the ruins, her body bruised and blooded but alive. She looked up at the sky, now clear and filled with stars, and allowed herself a weary smile. They had won, for now. Humanity had proven its strength, its resilience, its ferocity. And as the Krexians learned to fear the predators of Earth, Grant knew the fight was far from over.